All right. Once again, I just said it. All right. We're going to start. Anyway, so I'm going to start out this video with a little quote. Okay. This comes from a book called Stand a Little Taller. And it says, the value of good books. There's a scripture that says, seek ye out of the best books words of wisdom. And then the complimentary that's said to this is, good books are like friends. They're willing to give to us if we are willing to make a little effort. Hopefully these videos are making a positive impact in your life, and they're good. Okay, so done with that. Just trying to keep it interesting for us. All right, crown preparation. So a crown is like a cap that covers a tooth, okay? And when a patient comes in, their tooth is in pretty bad shape, so they have to have a crown on it. Once again, I'm not going to try and be redundant, but I am going to be redundant. And I'm going to say the first thing that you're going to do when you sit down for any procedure is say, Mickey Mouse, this is what we got planned today. Is this what we're going to do? Is this the same plan that you have? That's how I usually say it. This is what we have planned. Is that the same plan that you had? Anyway, so hey, Mickey Mouse, I've got a plan to do a crown on your front tooth today. Is that the same plan you have? Oh, yep, that's the same plan I had, Doc. Or nope. Then we're like, oh, great. What were you thinking? Sometimes they have something come up between last time and this appointment where they want to have it addressed, or sometimes you can fit that and this one in. So you just want to make sure that you touch base with them. And then once again, you're going to want to make sure that you have all the x-rays that you need. So if they change the plan on you, or if they just keep the same plan for you, you want to make sure that the x-rays are in there that you are going to need for the doc that day. So, and then you're going to update the medical history. And what are the questions that you're going to ask? Do you remember? So you're basically going to ask, so have you been to the hospital recently? Have you changed any of your medications? And then you're going to start taking their blood pressure. Well, you're not going to take it all the way from them. They need to have some blood pressure, but you're going to read their blood pressure. That might be more accurate for it. Anyway, all right, and then you're going to go for anesthetic. A lot of times, if you're going to be doing a crown on a previously root canal tooth, then sometimes you don't need to have anesthetic because the tooth doesn't have a nerve in it. And then you can save the patient from having to get numb. But most of the time, they have to get numb as well. So you'll do anesthetic. Once again, you'll do topical anesthetic first. And so you'll dry off their cheek with the gum. You'll put the cotton tip there with the anesthetic on there and let it sit for 15-30 seconds. Once again, might not be something you do at first, but you may have to learn how to do it, and then you'll start doing it. Because it does save the dentist a few minutes if you can do that. And then if you're going to work on the bottom, this is a little thing for you. You got to use a long needle. So that's the yellow one. And if you're going to work on the top, then you're going to use a blue needle. And you're going to have that set up in the syringe. And then once again, I like to have two different types of anesthetic out. The lidocaine, which is the red ring, and then the articaine, which is the gray ring. And once you have that set up, once you kind of work with the doc a lot, you'll see what kind of anesthetic they like to use. But always a safe thing to have both of them out, just in case you need it. And then you'll have the saliva ejector available for the patient. And why do you have that available to the patient? I hope you're saying in your mind, because once you take out the topical anesthetic, you don't want them to swallow all the spit that has the anesthetic in it. So you just have them close down on the saliva ejector, and that'll suck it out there really quick. And then once that's done, then you'll let the dentist do the numbing, and then you always want to give them a little bit of water and have them close down on the saliva ejector again a little bit, because why? Because it's really bitter if you have them taste the anesthetic, and that doesn't taste very good. So you always want to try and do those things, and that's always a good thing to make sure that as a patient experience specialist, that you make sure that they have a great experience. And sometimes I'll always say, hey, do you want to have more water? And if they kind of act as a little hesitant, then I'll say, it's free of charge. You can have as much as you want. And then they usually take it. So that's one thing that you can always say. Say, hey, the water's free. So you're already paying for enough. You might as well not have to pay for the water. All right. And then for the handpiece, there's a different type of burr that you have out for the handpiece. And that's usually a diamond burr. And then the slow speed you have you have the 4-round burr in there as well. Every dentist likes to have a different type of diamond burr out. We typically only have 1 or 2 that are available. But if a dentist likes to get really particular and try and do one thing their way, which you'll find out every dentist likes to do their way all the time, and we all have our own way, and we all have an opinion. And so that you may see him trying to put in, him or her, a diamond in there that you may not think is appropriate, but don't worry, the doc knows what they're doing. At least that's what we're supposed to do. And then I just have the restorative burr block available, because sometimes we need to make little small adjustments and little different things that typically aren't done all the time. So you'll have those set up in the handpiece. So once the patient's numb and you've got that all set up, the next thing we're going to make sure is we've got a PA of the tooth. And a lot of times for crowns nowadays, insurances want an intraoral picture of the tooth. So you'll take those, make sure those are available. And then to make sure that we can make them a temporary crown when they leave, we're always going to take a blue bite impression. And that's usually done in a triple tray, which is one of those little white trays. And the blue bite takes only about 30 seconds to set up. So you'll put that in there. You only put it on the side that the tooth of that you're going to be doing. You take that impression, you take it out, and that's what we're going to hold on to. Then you're going to, with the dentist, you're going to try and select the right type of shade. Once again, in the back, not as important, but with the front, I mean, sometimes you can spend more time trying to pick the shade than the actual doing of the crown preparation and temporary and everything else. But when the patient seems a little bit picky, it's always a good idea to have them help you pick the shade. That way, if it's wrong, it's kind of their fault rather than your fault. But it's a great idea to bring in as many people if the patient's kind of getting picky and just kind of all try and pick it. And it's always good to do it in a lot of different types of lighting. It's not really good to take the dental light and shine it on their tooth and try and figure out what type of shade it is, because that light versus the light that the sun gives or the natural light outside is not going to be the same. And so oftentimes we like to take away the dental light away while we're picking a shade, and then let the natural light come in from the windows and then try and pick a shade from that. And that usually gets you a pretty good color. Then you're going to try and do the crown preparation. So much like for a filling, you're going to have that suction tip right next to the tooth. You'll have they'll be doing the crown prep. Sometimes they like to have a cotton roll or a dry angle just to make sure everything stays really, really far away, because those diamond burrs are really, really aggressive and they take away tooth really, really fast, because you have to take away a lot of tooth when you do a crown. Once again, if you're going to be working on the top, the doc likes to usually have their mirror clear so they can see what they're doing. So that way they don't have to fly blind, if you will. Which I know that pilots fly blind, but they have computers telling them where to go, and we don't necessarily have computers to tell us where to go. So you got to help us keep that mirror clean. Then if we get through the crown preparation, a lot of times if a tooth is going to get a crown, it either has like a really big filling or it has a big cavity in it. And those, once we get in, sometimes the filling comes out or the cavity is really big, and sometimes we have to put a new filling in. And a lot of times we like to use a special type of filling material called the glass ionomer, which is a Fuji, is usually the brand that we get. And the LC stands for light cure. So that way we can cure it like a composite. We don't have to wait 10 minutes for it to set up. So anyway, to be able to do that, if you have to end up doing a buildup, if you need to do a buildup, it's kind of like a white filling material, so it needs to be really, really clear. The material doesn't take that long to set up, so sometimes you can do it without. But most of the time, I'd say 99.999% of the time, unless the patient's really hard to control or anything, you're going to isolate it with a cotton roll. You're going to place the conditioner, which you'll see it in a white bottle. You'll place the conditioner in there, and then you'll go through that and you'll dry it, and that only has to be air dried. You'll mix the Fuji just like you will amalgam. You'll put it in the little expressor, I guess you could call it, forcep. My mind's trying to blank. And then you'll give it to the dentist. They'll put it in. Then you'll take a white cotton tip that's wet. You'll wet it just like the type that you use for the topical anesthetic. You'll hand that to them. They'll condense it. You'll hand them an Explorer. The Explorer, they'll make sure that it's kind of cleared off and they can take away as much as they can without it. And then you're going to cure it just like you do a composite. Then once that's done, then you're going to, they're going to do a little bit more preparation, do a little bit more work. And then once the tooth is ready to go and they check the bite and everything else, and that's one thing that you'll always want to make sure of, is sometimes the dentist will ask to check your bite, not your bite, the patient's bite. And then once you do that, you want to make sure that you take the HVAC out, and so they can bite down. You don't want them to bite down on that. All right, once all the drilling's done, once all of the buildup is put in and everything looks great and you're ready for the impression, one thing that's really important is that all of the bleeding needs to be done in the on the tooth. So a lot of times we like to take the junction between the crown and the tooth below the gum line, and if we do that, then we want to make sure that all the bleeding stops, and that's done a lot. So a lot of times there's a little bit of bleeding around the gums when we do a crown. Once the bleeding is stopped, which is the only way you're going to be able to really stop it is with a hemostatic agent, which is like QuickStat. So you'll take the QuickStat, you'll hand that to the dentist, they'll put it on, you'll rinse it off, and then once that's done and the bleeding stops and everything can get really, really dry, then that's when you're going to take the impression. And to take the impression, patient experience specialist takes the triple tray, or the tray that you're going to do it, and you fill it up with the really, really thick material, which is the heavy body. And you're going to hand the dentist the light body material for him to put it on the tooth, and then you're going to hand him the tray with the heavy body in there, and then they're going to bite down on it. And then the impression material usually has to set up for 4 or 5 minutes. This is a great time for you to set the timer. And then once that comes out and everything looks really good on the impression, sometimes you have to do 2, sometimes 3 impressions, hopefully not all the time. But once you take 1 impression, if it looks really good, then you're going to make the temporary. Now, making it temporary is something that hopefully you'll get to eventually, where you'll be able to do it. But at first, the dentist will do a lot of making the temporaries. And they'll make the temporary with that Blue Bite impression material that you took earlier. They use some acrylic and put it in there, and you want to make sure that you hand all this to the dentist as they need it. Then once that sets over about 2 minutes or so, it doesn't take that long to set up, then you'll make adjustments. They'll take that out, and then they'll use articulating paper, much like you did for filling, make sure the bite's okay, and then you'll mix up some temp bond, and you'll cement that on. Oftentimes the dentist will use an Explorer to clean off the temporary cement, and then they'll check the contacts and make sure they're good with floss. So I would make sure that we have that available. Post-op instructions. One of the things I really like to tell the dentist, or not the dentist, is I want to tell the patient. So just so you know, we're putting this temporary crown on there, and it's about 80% of what your natural tooth was, or what your permanent crown will be like. So that way it kind of always puts in their mind, all right, I can only chew about 80% with it. I can only chew about something 80% strong with it. So chewing a sandwich or a burger, I say, is always great. But just like nuts and chips, the hard stuff, you want to try and stay away. And I always tell them the temporary crown is made out of filling material, so it's really strong, but when it covers a whole tooth, it's going to have limitations. And then another thing that can take off the temporary is anything really sticky, like gum or Laffy Taffy or that type of thing. So you always kind of want to warn them that if it comes off, it'll probably come off with one of those little sticky things. And then if they want to floss, one thing that's really important to tell for patients is if you floss, go down and then pull through rather than down and back up. Because sometimes if you go down and back up, it'll just boop, it'll take it right off. And it makes that noise when it comes off too. It just goes bloop. Anyway, so make sure that they do that. And then what you'll do after the patient leaves and after you've given those post-op instructions, you've done your clinical notes, etc., then you're going to do the instructions for the lab. And these are, the dentist is going to try and fill it out, but you'll take the impression that you took with the heavy body and the light body, and that will be sent to the lab. You'll fill out, you'll ask the dentist, hey, so which lab do you want to try and send this to? And a lot of times they'll say this or that, and then you'll take that form and you'll fill out the patient information, and you'll leave the information for the dentist to fill out. Unless the dentist asks you to fill it out, then that's fine. But the dentist will always have to sign it to make sure that he okays it. So you could fill out that material, and then he should be good to go. Then once the patient leaves, then you are good to go, and then you'll have in more detail explain to you, where do you take that lab case, where do you put it, how do we mark it in Open Dental, and make sure that it's that we track it and make sure we know when it's going to be coming back. So anyway, so that's how a crown works, and hopefully you had fun learning how to do a crown.